Good morning, everybody. I would like to call this Board of Education meeting to order, and I would like to ask everyone to identify themselves for the record as I call your name. Todd Ferrante is present. William Buchanan.
Present.
Katie Addis.
Present.
John Andes.
Present.
William Gordy.
Present.
Elena McComas.
Present.
Donald Smack.
Present.
We do have a quorum. Now can I have a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
A motion by Ms. McComas.
Second. Bill Gordy.
A second by Mr. Gordy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And as we move forward, I'm going to ask Mr. Tolbert to lead us in the invocation. I would like everyone to remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's bow our heads in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this beautiful January day. We thank you for waking us up again and just blessing us to be here. We ask you to continue to watch over our school system, Lord. Bless our students, bless our staff, Lord. And please bless us as we go through this budget process, Lord, and just continue to provide the resources that we need for our students and our staff and for us to continue to be successful. All this we ask in your precious name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Tolbert, thank you for leading us in a beautiful invocation today.
You're
Appreciate
welcome. Yep.
it. Now, as we go through the budget work session, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Tolbert for his presentation today. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, before we get into the budget categories, I just want to take a couple minutes and walk the board through a short PowerPoint. We actually went through most of these slides during the budget input meeting back in December, but I don't know who's watching who may not have seen those slides, so it's important for us to realize where we are as we start the budget process. So, Carrie, if you can move on. Our current year operating budget is $125,646,391. The capital outlay is $100,000. And school construction totals $815,000 this year, and that's all related to the Buckingham Elementary School project to keep that moving forward. Sources of revenue for FY24, and I've shared this many times, but I wanted to share it again. As you can see, the county local share is about 68.9%. The state aid share is 16.9%. Federal funds are 13.7% and 0.6% other. And it just shows that we continue to be very highly dependent on our county government for the funding in Worcester County. And just for comparison, in Dorchester or Somerset or Wacomico or neighboring counties, this is flipped with local and state share. They get about probably 70% of their funding from the state and probably about 20% from their county government. So we're totally dependent on our county for the funding of the school system. This breaks down the different categories of the budget, and you can see 86.5% of our budget is related to salaries and fixed charges. It's people. That's where the resources are in the school system. 7.1% is contractual services, and that is largely composed of our bus contractors. Other charges are 3.5%, and most of that is utilities, our electricity, our propane, natural gas, fuel oil. It keeps the lights on and the heat on in our buildings. 2.7% is supplies and materials, and 75% of that is materials of instruction for our schools and for our coordinators and for the annual lease payment we pay for our one-to-one devices of about $968,000. And we have 0.2% in other, which is equipment. Once again, I just wanted to highlight this, that 86.5% of our budget is our people. So as we go through the budget process, as we talk about potential reductions or potential cuts, it's going to come from reducing staff. That's where the funds are in the school system. They're not setting anywhere else. It's in people. A different look at our categories. Instructional costs represent 42.9% of our budget. Special ed is 10%. Student transportation is 6.3%. Operation and plant is 7.6%. Did I skip one, Carrie? A small one in there?
There's a teeny tiny one in here. There's
Student personnel, 0.3%. Thank you. My eyes are getting bad. Maintenance and plant is 1.2%. Fixed charges is 21.2%. Admin there is 1.5% of our budget. And mid-level, which is instructional support, is 7.1%. Next slide, I want to talk a little bit about FY23 fund balance. There was some discussion earlier. I saw some headlines about the board ahead $1.5 million, and we didn't hide anything. It's a good accounting practice to have some kind of fund balance, the surplus. And why do we need that? Several examples I can think of. Last year in FY 23, in the month of November, the fuel supplement paid to our bus contractors for that month was 32 cents. If that fuel supplement had stayed at 32 cents for the whole year, that would have been $500,000 in additional costs we would have had experienced as a school system that we didn't have budgeted. Special education is another example. In some years since I've been with the board, we've had students who have unique needs from a special ed perspective that we weren't able to meet, and we've had to have those kids go to places across the bay to meet their needs. That could be anywhere between $100,000 and $150,000 extra cost per student when that happens. So those are just some things that can come up during the year that we need to have some kind of surplus. A school system cannot end the year in a deficit situation. It's against state law. We have to end in the black. We have to have some type of surplus, and that's why we had surplus to cover those unforeseen issues. In the past, when we had the surplus, we've asked to use those funds to do one-time capital items. Like a couple years ago, we had some surplus, and we asked the county commissioners to use it to replace a turf field down at Pocomoke. They said yes. Otherwise, we had to send that request over to the county commissioners as a capital request. But because we had surplus, we were able to address that and keep that off the county's plate. We also used some of our fund balance to help offset the cost of putting air conditioner in at Stephen Cater High School gym this past year. We used some of our surplus in prior years to do the track replacements at Pocomoke High School and Stephen Cater High School. Once again, keeping those capital requests off of the county coffers and doing it in-house with surplus money.
But with the county commissioner approval.
Yes, the county commissioners did approve
We
that.
took it to them for their final
Yes.
approval, and they
We
said
did.
no every single time.
Can I ask
Exactly
a
right.
question on this slide?
Sure.
If we do have that fund balance, would we be able to go back to some of the things that we ended up cutting from this past budget, like the summer school program, for instance, and potentially using some of that funding?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because we actually did have some conversations in early August, mid-August, with some county leadership and say, hey, we're going to have some surplus. In prior years, we've used it for capital items. This year, can we use some of those funds to restore those cuts that we made because of MOE budget, like summer school and other MLI, 50% cut to our schools. And we were told at the time that the votes weren't there, that they wanted that money to come back to the county for OPEB.
Well,
Katie, until this year, that's how we've done it. And every year it's been fine. This year, Vince said it very clearly. One of the things I did was call over and ask for summer school to be restored for the 4 schools up north that is not done by grants. And we're told, as Vince said, the votes won't be there to give it to us.
well, I frankly was told differently. I've talked with them as well after I've seen this slide, and they indicated that they're waiting on a breakdown of information from you guys as far as maybe we can't fund an entire summer school program, maybe
That is true.
transportation wouldn't be there, or maybe we can't do it at all the sites, or maybe it would just be strictly for remedial training versus like a summer camp type atmosphere.
You
So I
have
think
got-
there's a lots of different things that we could potentially do.
Well, they have asked that question, and we are working on getting that information
I
back
got
to them.
that email over the Christmas holidays, and Vince and the team and I have started looking at that. But not to get into the detail that one of the problems, and we're going to address it, one of the problems, most of our kids who attend summer school need transportation.
Correct.
Yeah,
I-
so, yeah.
I think there's things, though, that we can look into as far as, is it just remedial training versus the quote-unquote fun aspects of summer camp with field trips and things like that. I mean, if we scaled some of those things back and just had it for those kids that specifically needed it with IEPs that need to have that structure, I mean, I think that it's something that we should be looking into.
Well, there are many facets of after-school and summer school programs. And one of the after-school programs, summer school programs, what it does is it provides remedial instruction for some of those kids who needs it. It prevents the summer slide, which we've experienced for years before we had summer school, which kids come back and they lost instruction that they had the prior year. So we spend weeks catching them up to where they were.
Right.
Those two things both happen. There's also opportunities for enhancement and gifted and talented. And that, you can talk more about it.
Dr. Wallace, you had a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that Mr. Slacum is here in the audience. I do not I want to be very respectful of Tamara Mills and the summer program that Tamara Mills puts on. We do not, and I know you said it in air quotes, but it is not a summer camp. We have spent years since Dr. Andes has been here building a summer program that is academically enriching for students, and the things that Mr. Tolbert just said. It may be better if we want to have some significant conversation about this to invite Ms. Mills to have that conversation. But for anyone, and I don't, it is not, we do not provide a summer camp for our students. And I want to be very clear about that. There is, as Mr. Taylor alluded to, and I know that I've been a part of the work that we have gotten back. And Ms. Schwartz and I just did get a budget back from Ms. Mills because, like Mr. Taylor said, I believe we got it right at the Christmas break or during or prior. But we have worked out that budget. One of the things that's going to happen in a slimmed down budget is that we will not be able to service as many students. And so preventing that summer slide and preventing that remediation that we may need, it's going to be very limited. We were able to use grant funding since COVID to provide really large summer academies in all of our schools. And so one of the things that budget does is trim down the number of kids, which does trim down transportation a little bit. However, transportation costs have gone up and have gone up. But not providing transportation is not something that would be, I don't think, an option for us, knowing the students who go to summer academy. But again, I think if the board wants to ask questions about that, Ms. Mills would be the best person to be answering those.
Ms. Schwartz, I want to ask you too, since you're a part of this, do you have anything to add to that?
Believe I work. It's on. There we go. No, I believe that both Mr. Tolbert and Dr. Wallace have answered that rather thoroughly. Ms. Mills did just give us a breakdown in our update on Friday around our summer school. It isn't a summer camp. There are opportunities for kids to grow and enrichment opportunities, though, so that might be where the confusion is around a camp atmosphere.
There's no confusion, and I understand that there are enrichment opportunities. I'm just saying if it's between no summer camp versus a trimmed down summer camp, I think it's something that we should be looking into.
Yeah, but I want to add that transportation is key to getting some of these students here that can't get there. So if you're going to cut transportation out of the picture, or if you're going to slim down transportation, you're going to be cutting a lot of kids out of the program, and I'm definitely not for that.
Right.
But once again, trimmed down versus nothing is
Right.
better.
Right.
Yeah.
And we know, as Dr. Wallace said, that we did a very large version with ESSER monies of our summer academies. Sometimes, in fact, we were held up in the state as inviting the most kids back in the greatest amount of time, and we knew that was coming to an end without ESSER funds, and we would go back to inviting a normal amount of students, but we never referred to it as a camp, and I know we keep going back to that, Mrs. Addison. We don't mean to keep harping on that, but it is a summer academy, and it is to reduce the summer slide, as Mr. Tolbert had said. So thank you for allowing us to address that.
Mr. Taylor?
I just want to remind the board that certainly academics is the focus of our summer academies and summer enrichment time, but as far as, and I do agree with Ms. Addis in that something is better than nothing, but I also want to share with the board that on occasion we take, for example, our most impoverished kids in Pocomoke to a water park on a Friday, that a local business person gives us the free tickets. It's just a matter of getting them there. And some of those kids last year would bring tears to your eyes because they have never experienced something like that. So although I agree, I want the academic piece to be in the forefront. I also think that that's the most important thing going, but we don't provide situations for our young people to just go have fun all the time. But keep in mind, a lot of kids that go to our summer programs don't get to experience what maybe a field trip or two has. And again, a lot of the tickets, and not all, a lot of the tickets and time is given because we have people who get on the phones, for example, with business people who have these water parks, and they either give us a very deep discounted rate, or in some cases they give it to us for free.
Yeah,
Any other
just
questions from
to
Mr.
reiterate, we did request to use that $1 million to restore those cuts, and we were told no to remit it for OPEB, which we did. And we have received a request, I think it was December 21st or 22nd, to give us some cost estimates on a scaled-down program, and we're working on doing that. We probably will provide that within the next week or two, I would think. Yeah, so we are working on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. This next slide really just sources of funding. State aid numbers won't be released until after the governor releases his budget. He's due to do that on January 17th. So hopefully within a couple of days after that, MSD will release our state aid numbers in draft form. So I'll have some idea about state aid for next year, but it won't be until probably the 18th or 19th of January. But as I said earlier, and as you can see in this slide, Worcester receives the lowest amount of state aid per pupil. So I don't anticipate state aid being a big factor in our FY25 budget. But hopefully I'm wrong and we'll get more than I think. County funding, at this time, we're hearing maintenance of effort funding again for next year. And just so the board knows, maintenance of effort next year is about a $500,000 cut from the county funds we received in FY24. So we'll have less funding from the county if it's MOE funding than we did this year, about $500,000 less.
How much is cut? How much cut is it?
It'll be about $500,000 less in county funding next year if we get MOE than what we got in FY24. $500,000. Yes, sir. Just talk a little bit about grants. We're still working on grants for next year. We don't have all the grant numbers in yet, but when we do have grant numbers for next year, we're sharing with the board. Some budget challenges that we're looking at as we start the budget process. You know, we cut last year because of the MOE budget that we received, the MOE funding. So just restoring those cuts would be about $1.5 million. Those cuts included cuts to the after-school and summer school programs. MOI to schools were cut. Supplies and materials and admin were cut, and instructional support were cut. The funding for high school graduations was cut. All those things we're asking hopefully to be restored. Other considerations, we're still in negotiations with both our teachers and with our support staff. We're all early on in the process, but those numbers are not anywhere in the budget yet because we're not finalized with those negotiations. The same with bus contractors. We had meet and confer sessions with our bus contractors. We met once. We're going to meet again. We don't have any numbers for bus contractor increases for next year. The blueprint implementation continues to be a major concern for us, specifically the $60,000 a year starting teacher salary. In FY24, the current year, our starting teacher salary is $50,275. So we got to get to $60,000 in 3 years, 25, 26, and 27, to meet that $60,000 requirement. If we did it the way we've always done it, that would require 6% COLAs for the next 3 years for us to get to $60,000 and meet the blueprint requirement. There's also National Board Certified Teachers. As the teacher becomes National Board Certified now, they, under law, have to receive $10,000 additional salary per the blueprint. So those costs continue to increase. Dual enrollment now, of course, is totally paid for by the school system for our dually enrolled students. Those fees are going to continue to go up. Salisbury University is raising their fees. I think Dr. Wallace just told me last week. They're going to continue to increase. Health insurance next year, our committees are still meeting. We don't have the final numbers yet. Last year it was over a 9% increase. We're anticipating higher this year. Right now I'm estimating probably a 12% increase in health insurance for FY25. Increase the local share of teacher pension cost. I'm estimating about $200,000 increase in that. And Time to Care Act, I think we're going to be okay in FY25. I don't think that's going to hit us until FY26, but it is down the road with Time to Care Act. Any questions on those items?
Vince, could you?
Vince.
No, could you please explain to the audience and the board members the Time to Care Act and the potential implications for funding?
Sure. The state of Maryland passed the Time to Care Act last year, and what it does is basically guarantees all employees up to, I believe it's 12 weeks of paid leave time off. And every employer with, I think it's more than 50 employees, more than one employee is required to comply. So everybody. So what they're going to do is put an increased payroll withholding basically on all employers of 1.2% of payroll. So it can be split evenly between the employer and the employee. or you can absorb it all as an employer. What we've decided to do is MABE has set up a consortium of counties and school systems to come together and do it through an insurance kind of a route. So go out there and see if we can have an insurance company fund this through basically the insurance fees. So we think that's going to be cheaper, but you're still talking several $100,000, $500,000 or $600,000 probably could be coming to our budget in FY26. Maybe it'll be less. We don't know. We haven't gone out and gotten bids from the different insurance companies, but it's a mandate. It's an unfunded mandate. As you know, we already offer generous leave to our employees. In my mind, we should be excluded from that act, but we weren't. But that's basically what it is. I explained that, Dr. Andes.
And I think
Yeah, I'd
Dr.
just like to-
Abbott has a follow-up.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
I just could add, and part of the Time to Care Act, as Mr. Tolbert says, is a 12-week benefit, but it's 12 weeks each and every fiscal year. So it's not, it doesn't go on a rolling year. It's, when the year comes, someone can apply for that again. And it's not just work within Worcester County Public Schools. It's an hour count no matter where you work. So if you work as a part-time service person, waitress or waiter, those hours count towards Time to Care Act, and they get compiled, and once someone meets that threshold, then money, they're eligible for Time to Care, which Vince explained. Right now we're trying to partner with MABE through a insurance broker that's going to take care of those things. It's very complicated.
So in essence, it's a Family Medical Leave Act paid leave.
Exactly.
So what the state of Maryland has done is said, under FEMLA, federal law, Family Medical Leave Act, employees can take unpaid leave to care for under specific conditions. Maryland has come and said, wait a second, we want it to be paid.
And that is correct. And when you add the 12 weeks of unpaid and 12 weeks of paid, you have an employee that could be off for 24 weeks.
And this comes effective in FY26?
We start paying in next October, I believe, and then the benefits will start a year after that.
Thank you.
Next slide.
Vince,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just one thing of clarification for me. Under maintenance of effort, healthcare increase is not included in that number. Is that correct?
That's correct. MOE does not take into account any type of inflationary increases. What MOE does, just to explain it for everybody, is it takes the cost per pupil funded by the local government last year, and it applies that same per pupil funding to next year. So if we go down 10 kids, we'll get less in county funding. If we go up 10 kids, we'll get.
Right.
But we're actually down a few students, so we're going to get less county funding, even though we have increases in health insurance, increases in local share of teacher pension. We're going to have salary increases, bus contractor increases. MOE does nothing to address those issues.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Question. Why is the maintenance efforts cut over $500,000 from last year?
Means upper.
Enrollment.
Why is the maintenance efforts cut $500,000?
Because it looks at
From the
enrollment.
county, from the county.
It looks like in our enrollment. So our enrollment, and this is a funny thing, actually, even though our enrollment is slightly up this year, the state's been using a 3-year average since COVID hit, because they had, school system saw a big drop in COVID. So what they said, we're going to do a 3-year average. So based on our 3-year average, our numbers are actually less than they were last year, but our actual enrollment this year is higher. That's the funny thing about it. But because the average student count is lower than it was the previous year, and the MOE says per pupil funding, that amount times less pupil means less money coming to us next year from the county. Did I explain that, Mr. Smack? Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Mr.
One of the last things I want to share with the board was this budget scenarios at different salary rates. So if we did a salary step and no COLA next year, our potential budget shortfall is over $5 million. That includes health insurance increases and other increases I talked about, but just a salary step and no COLA. Scenario 2 is a salary step and a 2%, which results in about a $6.7 million deficit. A salary step in 4% is over $8.5 million, and a salary step in 6%, which is what we need to get to the blueprint mandate of $60,000 a year starting teacher salary, is over $10 million budget shortfall. That's MOE funding, which is what we have been told initially that is on the table, and it does not include any increase in state aid because I don't know what that's going to be yet. So if state aid increases by $1 million, then we're $9.3 million short instead of 10.3, and I'll know that number hopefully in the next 7 to 10 days. Next slide, Carrie. This is the upcoming budget dates. We have another scheduled budget work session tomorrow, same time, same place. February 6th, we have a budget work session scheduled, or the third one. On February 20th, the board is scheduled to adopt a proposed budget for FY25. On April 9th, we have a meeting with the county commissioners where we go over and present our budget to them directly. On May 7th, the county has their budget hearing, which that's open to the public and has public comment. On June 4th, the county commissioners will adopt their proposed budget, or their budget for FY25, and 2 weeks later, the board is scheduled to adopt our budget for FY25 on June 18th. That kind of finishes my presentation, and then I'll sit down and we'll go through the categories unless the board has other questions at this point.
Any questions for Mr. Tolbert? Thank you.
You're welcome. The board should have a handout.
Vince, can I
Sure.
ask that you and Terry sit at that table with your stuff so we
Sure.
can all see you, please?
Yep.
If you can pull up a chair, Terry, there with Vince, I'd appreciate that. And you can share the mic. That way we can make better eye contact as we go through it. Vince, if you will, for the boards, would you please introduce what Terry does in your office so they know who, she's not very seldom here. I'm putting you on the spot today, Terry.
Sure. This is Miss Terry Searing. She's the finance manager. She's basically my right hand. She does so much to keep our department running, to make sure everything's flowing smoothly. She's a big help with the budget, getting where it needs to be. She helps with the daily stuff, make sure that the payroll is getting processed, accounts payable is getting processed. She just has her hands on everything on a day-to-day basis. And thank you, Terry, for all you do. I appreciate it. Oh, thanks. You might need it.
If you talk, you do, because it's on live stream.
Yeah. So the board has a packet with a cover sheet FY25 proposed budget work session, and that's what we're going to be going through today. Thank you. Once again, it's very early in the FY25 budget process. As I said, state aid has not been released yet. We're going to review the budget categories as they stand now. As I said, we're still in salary negotiations, so there's no salary numbers in here, and there's no related cost. There's no health insurance included in here yet because that's not been finalized. Bus contractor numbers are not in here yet for FY25 because we're still meeting. And just one more time, salaries and benefits and bus contractors, those costs together are about 93% of our budget. So 93% of our budget is employees and bus contractors. The next page on page 1. First of all, I just want to say that the format has been changed. We've updated our budget category format. Last year, we had some conversations back and forth with our county commissioners, and they wanted it presented in a different format. And they brought up Wycomico County Public Schools budget as an example of something that they liked. So Terry and I have tried to use the Wycomico County Public Schools budget as an example of how to set up our categories for this year. So what you're looking at today reflects those changes and updates. Administration, just so we know, administration, we rank 21 out of 24 counties in spending per pupil in administration. So we're very low. There's only 3 counties that spend less than we do in administration. So we don't spend a lot of money in this category. Things that are included in this category are costs associated with the Board of Ed, with legal, with finance, payroll, HR. Those kind of things are included in the category administration. Page 2.
Can I ask a question on page
Sure.
1? There was a increase of 11.67% in administration salaries from the fiscal year 23 expended and fiscal year 24 approved. But during that same period of time, the full-time employee count dropped from 22.9 to 22.4. So where is the increase coming from?
I don't have the details in front of me, but that depends on who is eligible for step increases. If it did any other changes, longevity steps come into play. All those things can influence the percentage increase, and it's such a small category too.
And can you explain what the classified versus professional means under salaries and wages? I know it's throughout the documents, but I would just like an explanation. of that.
Classified are basically those employees that are eligible for overtime, like support staff employees. Professional include teachers and administrators, and those are not eligible to the hourly rate. And so basically, professionals are teachers and those kind of positions, and classified or support staff positions. Did I explain it?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. The next page is basically, this is the way that Wacomico County breaks out their salaries and wages. So this is what we're proposing to do for FY25 and going forward. It breaks down the positions in that format, and then between classified, professional, and other. So that's what we propose to do going forward. It is what Wacomico County Public Schools budget does. And I've done that for each category. On page 3, just starts to list the details of what's in administration outside of salaries. It has things like the audit that we have to have annually, legal, which of course is our legal counsel, data processing, copying contracts. Then it has supplies and materials, office supplies, postage, advertising, in-service items, computer supplies. There's meetings and conferences and recruiting fees, subscriptions and dues. So there's really just the typical items that any operating department would have.
I'm curious too on that. There's a lot of things under supplies and materials that are lower in their trends for the approved fiscal year 24 versus previous years. For example, office supplies, they're down 83% from fiscal year 23. In service workshop meeting supplies, they're down 94%. Computer supplies are down 97%. There's overall, it's down 77.5%. Is that
Well, when you're looking at those first 3 columns, it's expended.
right?
And
So are these just not completely tallied yet, or trended to be the equivalent to a year
Well,
completed?
the honest truth is administration has never had enough money in the category, and there's always expenses are usually higher, and we've usually had to cover those expenses and supplies and materials by savings in other areas in administration or by transferring in from another category. As I said earlier, administration ranks 21 out of 24 counties. We've always tried to keep administration very, very low, and in some cases you can see it's probably too low. We should probably look at beefing up some of those categories, but we have not done that at this point in time in the proposed budget. But really, it's not enough money in administration for what we actually need. We've always been very lean.
Can you explain what subscriptions and dues are?
Sure, it's subscriptions we pay, like our MABE dues that we pay. Those are an example. ASMEC, as part of the Energy Trust, those are in there. Those
Professional organizations that people like myself and others that are a member of, Phi Delta Kappa, MASSSP, Maryland Association of Secondary School Principals, ASBO, there's several.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They're not really big expenses, but
Thank you.
On the importance of why, specifically made as an ASBO, those
Pazam.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
I don't think the general public understands probably that that's not like, oh, we'll just cut that subscription. You know, it's not like I want to order a magazine.
sure. Well, first of all, MABE stands for Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and I think every school system is a member of MABE. And as part of our membership, of course, MABE lobbies for the school system. MABE secures us legal counsel at reduced rates. They provide, I believe, conferences every quarter from the legal department that Dr. Wallace attends, maybe Dr. Apt. They're just a huge resource for the school system, and I don't know what we do without them. Their insurance programs. We participate with both the pool for liability and property insurance, and for the workman's comp fund for workman's comp insurance. We could not exist, I don't think, without participating with MABE and what they do. PZAM, of course, is a public school superintendent association that Mr. Taylor belongs to, and I believe every school system belongs to. ASBO is Association of School Business Officials. A lot of our employees attend business-related. A lot of our business-related employees, finance, payroll, transportation, attend conferences of ASBO. They provide professional training on things that are happening, law changes that are being implemented, and how things are being handled. Dr. Abt is actually the president this year of ASBO. And what was the other one I was going to talk about, Dr. Wallace?
It's
ASMAC, sure. The ASMAC Energy Trust, Eastern Shore of Maryland superintendents put together an energy trust years ago, back in 2001, I believe. And all the lower shore school systems came together to address the increasing cost of electricity and the deregulation that happened back in 2001. So we're able to go out and purchase electricity on the wholesale market, basically, and buy out a year, 2 years in advance, lock in rates that are favorable. They've saved school systems on the shore millions and millions of dollars over the past 20 years. And now we actually have county governments that have joined, Worcester County commissioners have joined probably 10 years ago. Community colleges have joined that organization. So
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
And I had one other question too. As far as the miscellaneous contracted services, has nothing been spent in that category yet for this year?
For FY24, that was what's approved. The FY24 approved. So nothing was actually allocated to that in FY24. This doesn't reflect actual expenditures for 24. This is the budget for 24.
Oh,
The first three columns, I should explain that. 21, 22, and 23 are actually expended amounts for those years.
right.
24 is the approved budget. And then the last column, requested FY25, are numbers that are in at this point in time for FY25 requests.
Question, Vince.
Yes.
In-service workshops, meetings, and supplies. It's been just my eyes are failing. It was $36,253, and this year is $2,082.
Yes, and as I said, we don't budget enough for those things in admin. Admin's really low in their budget for some items because we try to keep it low. So those overages have to be handled by budget transfers from other categories within the admin or transferred from other categories. And just some things that are included in that, Mr. Smack, are things like our tenure teacher reception that we do. A teacher receives tenure after 3 years. And what we've always done in Worcester for a long time is we have a little reception to recognize that achievement, which is huge for a teacher getting tenure. It's held over at Technical High School. Chef Phil has some chicken wings, some meatballs, and some crab dip, and they go over and we celebrate that accomplishment. We do something very similar to for this retiring personnel when they retire in June. Same type of food. Those employees have worked for the school system for 30, 35, 40 years. We think it's the right thing to do to recognize them with a few meatballs and some chicken wings. That money goes to Technical High School. It's reinvested back in the culinary arts program. It helps those kids with their training. So that's kind of things that are included in that account, Mr. Smack.
But that's a big drop
It,
from.
it is, and we'll probably actually spend more than that, but that's what the budget is. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
questions? Okay, you can go forward, Vince. Thank you.
Sure. The next category is instructional support. This includes costs related to the chief academic officer, pre-K through 8. Includes our principals, our assistant principals, our central office coordinators, our school secretaries, our county office, our central office secretaries. Basically, the cost to operate our school offices are in this category. I don't know if there's any questions on instructional support. Next couple of pages are just, well, one is a detail, like I said, what Comico County does. We've done something similar on page 5.
I got a couple questions on page 4.
Sure.
With the chief academic officer, it looks like it's dropped in cost from expended to now the approved fiscal year 24, from 197 to 166. Is there an explanation really for that?
I believe that in expended FY23, there was a portion of, I believe Dr. Wallace was allocated to that section because she does oversee academics too as part of her responsibilities. So I believe a portion of her salary may have been charged there in FY23.
And it's just got charged differently for FY24?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then as far as the rates of the principals, assistant principals, and the central office instructional staff, there's 6% increase for principals, 39% increase for assistant principals, and 13% for the office instructional staff. Is that pretty much the same explanation that you had on the previous pages?
Sure.
It's including all of the insurance as well as longevity,
Steps,
all of
steps,
okay.
yeah, all those things. Yeah.
Right. And then the blanks, once again, it's because it wasn't budgeted. You never even had a budget line item
Well,
for those.
and let me clarify that there was a lot of conversation
there's a lot of
spring
blanks throughout this, and I'm
about
just
how the school system didn't have budget amounts in certain places, and the reason why is because as a school system we're required to budget by the category and subcategory. We were never set up to budget by the line item detail. So what we try to do going forward in FY25 is start budgeting more to the line item. Even though school systems typically don't budget to that line item detail, we budget to the category and the subcategory per state law. We actually expend by line item, and we always have, but we really haven't budgeted to the line item. And we're trying in FY25 to do more budget by line item. And that's what you'll see reflected in FY25.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Tolbert, I think it would be a good explanation of talking about the requirements, I believe it's called the Maryland Manual or something like that, that you're, in essence, your Bible, when you decide in terms of allocating funds, expenditure funds, who goes in what category, what gets put in what category, so forth and so on. And I can't remember the exact title of that document, but I think it might be helpful to explain to our community and our board the criteria that you have to follow in your department when you put together an operating budget or when you assign an expenditure to a specific category in operating budget.
Sure. It's basically an accounting manual for school systems. It's published by the Maryland State Department of Education, and it tells us where to put certain items, which category they go in. Like I couldn't put Ms. Shorts in operation plant. She has to go into instructional support.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers could not go into operational plant. They either have to go in instruction or they have to go in special education based on what they're teaching. All items are like that. They're mandated where they have to be reported and what category they have to go in our budget. So I just can't put anything anywhere, and
Right.
you know, it's mandated by this manual that Dr. Andy's talking about.
All school systems follow this.
Yes, they do. Yep.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Tolbert. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. So we can move on from instructional support. We get to instructional salaries on page 7. That's basically our largest category of our operating budget. It represents about 41% of our total budget. It includes regular ed teachers, regular education EAs, CRTs, media specialists, guidance counselors, tech coaches are all included in their instructional salary category.
I know we haven't gotten to page 8 yet, but it kind of coincides with page 7 as far as the numbers, as far as like the total number don't match up. I guess what is the difference between the top portion of page 7 and page 8? And for instance, the total number of instructional salaries is 657 on page 7, and then on page 8, it's 668.5.
We're still going through this process,
Okay.
and we can reconcile that number. But I think with that 668 is actually what's actually in the school system right now. As
That's the
opposed,
more current.
That's the more current
Okay.
version, the 668.
Is it, would you say that that's correct, that page 8 type style across the board with this budget is the more current? Because it's in other areas as well, like in special education, the numbers aren't matching up either. So would you say that budget summary general fund page for each category is the more current numbers?
Yes,
Okay.
the first page was put together as part of what we did for the county back in the spring.
Okay.
And the page that we're proposing to do going forward was actually put together by my payroll accountant over the past week. So I believe those numbers are the most current and up-to-date numbers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The other aspect too is throughout the school year, these numbers may change based on the needs of students.
Sure.
So as an example, through the IEP process, we may have a student come from another school system requires a one-to-one, which means an educational assistant. So consequently, we will have to go out and hire an educational assistant. So these numbers are dynamic and they're always in flux based on the needs of the students, as in my example, come and go, enter the school system or leave the school system. So what I heard you say, Mr. Tolbert, is basically we do the best we can to take a picture in time. And that photograph in time of those numbers may reflect what's here today, but based on the student's needs of, let's say, a student coming into our school system, it may change by tomorrow based on the needs of a particular student. Or, as an example, we may have a teacher all of a sudden decide they want to retire. And so consequently, those numbers will change. So the approved budget, 23-24, and the proposed budget, 24-25, in this particular column on page 8, could change at any time based on the dynamic needs of the school system, not the approved budget, but a proposed budget, because, again, in my example, we have students who come, they have specific needs, things change, so forth and so on.
You're exactly right, Dr. Andes. So when that first page was put together back last spring, that's what we had. And this was done like a week and a half ago, and that's what we currently have. And as Dr. Andes so eloquently said, the needs of our students change all the time. People are hired and leave all the time. Those numbers are constantly changing. Yeah. Moving on to page 9 is textbooks and classroom supplies. Basically what this is the materials of instruction for our schools and for our central office coordinators. If you remember, we cut this by 50% last year's part of MOE budget. It also includes the annual lease payment for our Apple iPads for a one-to-one of about $968,000. So that's what this category does.
A lot of the materials of instruction seem to have gone down in price. Did we get different curriculums, or what would be the explanation for that?
Part of it is
On page 9.
we did reduce the
Okay.
budget because of the cuts to the schools.
Oh, cut in half, okay.
Yeah.
In that cut, Katie, that meant like for MOE or MOI. last year, all the schools got cut 50% of what we send them. So that could reflect some of these numbers as well.
Right.
So if they were getting, for example, at Stevie Care High School, if we send them for materials and stuff, $40,000, I'm just picking a number, I
Right.
don't know without looking. They were told last year they're only getting 20,
Right.
so that reflects
Yep.
that.
And Mr. Tober, I think it would be helpful for our community to understand that we have a history of the school system allocating money to the 14 schools to allow those schools to make specific decisions about how those funds. And if you could please just take a minute and talk about that process of how the school system goes about allocating funds in what particular areas, like textbook supplies, materials of instruction, those kinds of things, so that our audience understands that we don't, Mr. Tolbert doesn't sit in central office and decide how to spend money, but the money goes to our schools who are in the best positions to make those determinations, as Mr. Taylor talked about, in expenditure of funds at local schools. So would you please talk about that for about 1 minute?
Sure, yeah. We have a spreadsheet that Terry actually does now that I used to do. It's an instructional allotment spreadsheet, and it basically allocates the instructional MOI money that we have. It has the enrollment in each school and what it does, and then on the top, and then down at the bottom, it has an amount allocated for textbooks or for science or for paper or whatever it may be. And based on that enrollment is how those schools receive those funds. So it's not something, as Dr. Andy said, that I just make up. It's allocated by that spreadsheet based on the school's enrollment, based on whether it's elementary or high school or middle school. And also, once that allotment is given to the schools, we've never held the schools so, hey, you got to spend that for math, or you got to spend that for your science. We've left it up to the school principal to use those funds as they see best fit to serve the students in their school, because they know better than I do what they need at the school system. I mean, Mr. Taylor, Dr. Wallace, Dr. Epps, Ms. Starks, all been principals. They know what their needs are. We've never held them to any line items, up to their school principal to spend those allocated funds in the best way possible to serve the students in their buildings.
So what I just heard you say, to clarify, is that we have a process in place where we take the money, basically that's the top half of page 9, and distribute that to our 14 schools based on student enrollment.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Moving on to page 10, other instructional costs. This includes things like consultants, athletic fees, fees that we pay for our referees, that referee our games, copying equipment contracts, internet service, broadband, equipment for school furniture and band equipment, and those types of things are included in other instructional costs.
Mr. Tolbert, just to clarify, you're seeing significant increases in some of these costs as well, based on past years of inflation, and costs have gone up.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. Exactly right. Moving on to page 11, special education. And this is, of course, all costs related to providing services to our special education students. It also includes the costs related to Cedar Chapel Special School, which is a school that serves approximately 50 students that are severely disabled. It is a very expensive school. It costs about $60,000 per pupil at Cedar Chapel. But it's a school that I think the community needs and appreciates, and one that I'm glad that we're able to provide. Any questions on special education?
With the, for example, speech therapists, there are 10.75 approved for fiscal year '24, but under salaries and wages, there's nothing listed. Can you explain why there's no budget number for that? And it happened also with like occupational therapist.
Yeah, once again, we did not budget before to the line item detail of Yeah, so we didn't allocate those numbers in that detail to salaries. But we did always charge that level of detail. We didn't really allocate our budget to that line item detail because we're not required to. But going forward, we are going to have line item detail for many of those accounts that line up more accurately with expenditures. But as Dr. Andy said, we've always followed the accounting manual mandated by the State Department of Education, and now we're being asked to provide more detail, and we're going to do that.
And can you explain, for the nurse line item, it went from 59,000 to 104,000 with still just one nurse?
Right here.
What do you mean by one nurse?
It's listed under the account description as one, approved
okay,
for
I got
one
you, I got you.
person. But when you go down to school-based staff underneath, it says for approved fiscal year '24, it's now 104,000. So did we,
I believe we added an additional
we add
nurse
an
at Cedar
additional
Chapel
nurse?
Special
Okay.
School, but it hasn't been reflected in FTE accounts. And
because,
like I
yeah, it's
said,
not reflected on the other page either.
you know,
We have the same thing in special education supervisor. If you look there, there's the cost is almost double what it was the previous year.
Right.
yeah. So we're like I said, this is a work in process. We're right now in the middle of changing the budget, and we'll of course verify all those numbers before it comes to you in February.
Thank you.
But we did add additional nurse. I don't think it's been picked up in the FTE count yet.
Gotcha.
And I think you were using the tracking services before to pay that nurse, so it actually just made more sense for us when we were doing that because we couldn't hire a nurse.
Gotcha.
We were finally able to hire.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you.
And just as a point of clarification, some of our students, and I love Cedar Chapel Special School. I don't mean to offend the other 13, but it's my favorite school. Some of our students who attend Cedar Chapel Special School need a nurse with them constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's critically important for that that student or those students to have a nurse available from the time they get off the bus until the time they get back on the bus. So in terms of nursing services, I think it's critically important for the health and safety of those particular students that they have. I know in the past we had private duty nurses, contractual services as was talked about, but to have a person on our salary and our employee, I think is critically important.
And Dr. Andes, there are some cases where we've had nurses ride the bus to pick them up and ride back home with them all the way till we let them off to their residence.
And again, I don't mean to offend the other 13 schools. I apologize, but Cedar Chapel's my favorite school.
Thank you, Dr. Andes. I did want to note, I should note this is all stamped draft. We are very early on in the process. These numbers are still being checked and rechecked, and before it comes back to the board in February, it won't be draft, it'll be final at that point in time. So, so special education, I don't know if you have any other questions on special education.
Mr. Tolbert, if I recall correctly, and you can correct me, when you shared with us the federal audit, I think we received somewhere around 1.2 million from the federal government for special education. I think, am I close?
It's probably between 1.5, 1.7, but you're very close, yes.
Okay. And we're spending, rightly so, it needs to be spent somewhere around $12 million
Plus fixed.
plus fixed charges on top of that.
Yeah.
So it's going to be somewhere around $16 to $18 million.
Yes.
Because I'm old, I remember when Gerald Ford signed into law Public Law 94-142. And that was the All Children Handicap Act in 1975. And at that time, President Ford said that the federal government would pay for 40%, state and federal government would pay for 40% of the cost of educating children with learning challenges, and then the locals had to come up with 60%. The point I'm trying to make is the federal government has never, ever fulfilled that promise. And I'm hoping that this Congress and this federal government and this president will, at some point in time in the future, fulfill that promise, provide additional support in the area of special education. So in essence, the federal government, instead of providing 40%, is providing 10%.
You're exactly right, Dr. Andes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You said 1975?
75. 75. I'm really old.
You were just a child.
I might have taught you.
I might have taught you.
Oh, Mr. Smack, you have taught me on many occasions. I appreciate it.
Moving on page 14, the student personnel services.
I had a quick question on page 13. Can you explain what non-public placements are?
Sure, I talked about that briefly.
That's
Well, one
where
of the
they
things
go
that-
out of county?
Yeah, if for some reason we had a student who we could not meet the needs of from a special ed perspective, there have been instances where that student has been placed in out of county in another facility to meet their needs. And when that happens, it's paid out of county. In some years, we've had $500,000 or $600,000 in expenditures.
As far as like a hospital stay or?
Our special school or
Special school,
special,
okay.
School of the blind.
Right.
Different examples. An IEP team would make that decision. Often there's advocates involved. That's a really tricky category because it's very hard to make a judgment on who's going to move to our school system. And then are we going to be able to serve them? And then they move to our school system and they've already been in a private placement or non-public placement. And then we're, through their IEP, expected to continue that service. So sometimes we might have none, and sometimes we could have 1 or 3 or 5 or,
Depends on the year.
good Lord, hopefully not more than 5. Because often, as you know, it's everyone I'm sure knows, that's not around here. So you're talking about service, you're talking about transportation, lodge, living there, because basically there's nothing that's
Here.
local for us,
Right.
right?
So typically that would be Shepherd Pratt or Kennedy Krieger in the greater Baltimore area. So if we were in Baltimore area, we would be sending students
Directly
vis-a-vis
there.
a bus
Right.
to either Kennedy Krieger for a day program or Shepherd Pratt for perhaps a residential program.
Thank you.
And I should give a shout out to Wendy Phillips and Bess, who lead our special ed department, and all they do to make sure that we do and are able to meet the needs of our special ed students, and we don't have a lot of out-of-county placements. Those two ladies do a phenomenal job. Moving on to page 14, student personnel services. It's a very small category. It basically just the costs associated with our student services department.
Student services as in,
People personnel workers, and then the supervisor, part of her salary is charged there.
no, I'm good. Thank you.
On page 17, we have our student health services. Basically, this is just our school nurses and costs associated with health room supplies and operating that area in the school. On page 20 is student transportation. This is, of course, the cost associated with providing transportation to our students, including field trips, athletics, band, etc. We did reduce field trips last year as part of MOE, and we also reduced the after school as part of the MOE budget. We don't have any numbers in there yet for next year for bus contractors because we're still in the meeting and confer process, and we'll have those numbers updated when the board approves the budget in February.
If I could go back to student health services just for a moment.
Sure.
Some of our school systems in the state of Maryland, actually the nurses are employed by the health department rather than the school system. In our particular case, it's always been historical that we employ the school nurses to provide services for our students. And the other aspect I think people need to understand, our community understands, is that our school nurses have about, if I remember correctly, 67 to 68,000 visits during the school year. So we operate one of the largest healthcare systems in our school system. And I think that's critically important for our community to understand that our nurses provide a very valuable service to our students in our school system each and every day. So I thank all of our school nurses for what they do. But I thought it was important for everyone to understand that in some particular cases, those school nurses are employed by the local health department. Other aspect is all of our school nurses are registered nurses. Some school systems don't employ RNs to be in their schools. And I think we need, obviously, an RN in each of our schools, and I think it's critically important for the service that we provide to our students. Thank you.
Great point, Dr. Andes. So are there any questions on transportation? As I said, the big number will be the bus contractor increases, which will be updated later. The next category is operation of plant on page 24. The largest, about 75% of this category, is custodian salaries and utilities. And there's also other contractual services in here like trash pickup, environmental services, building repairs and those kind of things. Clocks and bells, alarm systems are in here. Once again, Ms. Ash, you'll notice a lot of them didn't have budget amounts for FY24, but we are proposing line item budgets for that in FY25.
Okay.
And if I could go back, I'm sorry, to transportation, just as a point so our community understands, we operate the largest transportation system in our county. Our school buses travel about 7,000 miles a day, somewhere around there. And when you think about that, every 3 days our buses travel enough distance to go around the earth once at the equator.
Wow.
And I want to shout out to our school bus contractors. I think we do it the right way. In a prior life, I came from a school system that had a contractor might operate 12 or 15 school buses. When I came here, there is one contractor, one bus. I think that's the best way to do it. And I think we do it right. And I want to thank all of our school bus contractors for the great job that they do each and every day. Transporting our students safely on those beautiful stretch yellow limousines that they do. They're the first people who see our students in the morning and greet them, and they're the last person in the evening that says goodbye to them. And I want to thank them for doing it, but I think it's important for our community to understand the length and breadth of our student transportation system. And when I keep thinking about it, every 3 days, that's enough distance to go around the earth once.
Wow.
It's incredible what they do.
It sure
and I
is.
also want to give a shout out because when we look at that staffing in transportation, we basically have one person and one secretary in charge of transportation for our entire school system. And I can't remember the exact miles that they travel a year, but somewhere around
At 1.7 million miles a year.
in terms of what they do. So I thank all of our transportation folks for getting our kids to school safely and back home safely, and the great job that they do. So I apologize again for skipping back.
No, you're perfectly fine. And while we're talking about transportation, something that's really increased in the past several years is increased cost for homeless fit students. We've talked about this with the board before, but if a student is placed in another area for whatever reason and attended our school system in the past, if it's found to be in their best benefit to stay in Worcester County Public Schools, then we have to provide transportation. That student could be in Salisbury, it could be down on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, it could be in Delaware, but if it's found in the best interest of the student, we have to go provide transportation, whether it be through the bus, through a van. We have to provide that transportation. It has become quite expensive over the past several years. It's a federal mandate, but it's not funded, something that the school systems had to absorb.
For example, we have, a kid that lives in Dorchester County and comes to Worcester County Public Schools. Dorchester County school bus picks him up, drops him off to a Wycomico County school bus sometimes. Or we have to go provide a van to go all the way to Dorchester. But we have situations too where we try to work it out to save money. Dorchester, Wycomico picks him up from Dorchester, drives to the line here in Worcester, and then the Worcester bus takes him. So that kid's changing the bus 3 times. And also for the board, just for your information, if you didn't know, we don't use the term homeless anymore. It's fit, as Mr. Tolbert said, it's families in transition. So if you hear the term fit, that's what it means, families in transition.
And that's mandated by federal law, so that's not something that we have a choice on. We do have best interest meetings for students, because as you can imagine, that, like, living in Dorchester County and going to, I'm trying to think the furthest one, I guess Pocomoke Elementary maybe, is a long ride for a student early in the morning. So we do have best interest meetings, and a team makes that decision. But we do have several situations where we have kids traveling a great distance, and sometimes it's for a short period of time because they're in between housing and they're staying with a family member and hope to be back. And sometimes it can be longer than a short period. But that is mandated by federal law. It's not like something we decided to do. Not that we wouldn't do it, was in the best interest of kids always, but that is mandated by law.
Back to operation.
Operations. So, any questions on operation of the plant?
I want to make a comment about operations of plant. We do so much, and I know Dr. Andes would agree back in his tenure in my chair. We do so much with so little for the 14 schools, central office, with just a very minimal staff. We have one electrician for 15 buildings. And there's days where Sam, who's in, and I'm not saying this because he's here, he is up and down these roads to schools. He starts very early in the morning. Sometimes Dr. App or I will get called that we've got a boiler down and it's 10 degrees outside. But those guys are on that, and it amazes me how well we maintain our buildings on limited staff. And I know Sam every year comes to Dr. App and Dr. App to me saying, Lou, we got to do something to get more staff in these areas to help out with our needs. But we continue to make it happen. So it's always amazed me in the many years that I've been in the school system that we maintain high levels of clean, nice buildings, well operated. This building is over 60 years old, almost 75 years old. And there's a lot of things you don't see that we make work in this building. But again, we are talking about low in administration, 21 out of 24. That amazes me too, to maintain. It's because we have quality people. But the operation of plant under Mr. Slacum's leadership, I don't know how we do it, but we do. So I just want to give a shout out to them and to Mr. Slacum for the work they do every single day to make sure our schools, and they will tell you, it's a wonder they're not laughing now. I watch things because I believe our outside of our buildings send a message. And so when I'm riding around buildings, I'm calling Sam and saying, Sam, we need to look into this, we need to look into that. But as somebody said earlier, the transportation, the bus driver is the first person that sees a kid. Our community opinion, which is outstanding for the most part of our buildings, it's because of what they see on the outside before they ever enter the inside. And our maintenance guys just do a terrific job along with our custodial staffs to make that a possibility.
And just to echo what Mr. Taylor said, we have a very reactive maintenance budget. We don't have a lot of money sitting around in the maintenance department that we don't utilize. We try to make everything work, and we squeeze every penny we possibly can. So.
Yes, we do. Exactly right. And moving on to maintenance. And in the category of maintenance, we actually do rank 24 out of 24 in per pupil spending in the category of maintenance, as Mr. Taylor said.
Sorry, I had a quick question on page 26. Can you explain what other contracts mean under under the operation of plant contracted services? It's requested fiscal year 25 for $80,000. I'd just like an explanation for that.
It's things that aren't covered in the above line items. There's many needs that come up from our operation perspective. I don't know if Sam knows specifically what be contracted. That would be another contracted services.
Sam, if you could come up, because it's got to be on the mic, because we're live streaming.
Thank you.
without seeing all the line items that are in there, we have to do water treatment periodically at different facilities. We've got the swimming pool that we operate at Cedar Chapel. There's individual contracts that we end up having to enter into to take care of our buildings and the needs of our students that may not be captured in one of the other line items. Without being able to
seeing it
see,
yet.
it's kind of hard to say, but my guess is that's exactly what is captured in that number.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaken. I appreciate that. Move on to maintenance of plant. As I said, we're 24 out of 24 school systems and per pupil spending in this category. And we are reactive maintenance, as Mr. Taylor explained. To go to more of a different format, maintenance is very expensive. To go to preventive maintenance. In the long run, it saves money, but for the first few years, it requires a substantial increase in the way you operate maintenance. So just going through that category, like I said, I tried to provide additional line item details for the budget going forward. Some of those are based on the averages of what we've experienced over the past several years in those different line items. But maintenance is so hard to estimate exactly what you're going to need. As Mr. Taylor said, we have 15 buildings of varying ages with thousands of pieces of HVAC equipment, for example, that have to be maintained. And we have no way of knowing what's going to need repair now, possibly 18 months from now when the budget year ends in June of 25. So this is our best estimate at this time. And I don't know if there's any questions on maintenance or not, but the next category is fixed charges. It's our second largest category of our budget. It's basically costs related to employee benefits, health insurance, FICA, OPEBs in here, $2.8 million. A lot of those numbers have not been updated yet for FY25 because we're waiting to get the final salary numbers to update the FICA and related charges to the payroll. And of course, health insurance is not updated yet because we don't have those numbers until probably later in February is when we'll get those numbers on health insurance rates for next year. Any questions on fixed charges? The last category is capital planning. It's actually the smallest category of our budget. And it basically just covers the cost of our facilities planning department with a little bit of money for a portion of a secretary. That's split between facilities and maintenance and operations. And there's some funding for a few office supplies and professional conferences. Any questions on capital planning?
There was a really big decrease with architect and engineering between the fiscal year 21 and 22 compared to fiscal year 23. Is there a
That was during middle of the
Yes.
Camp Middle School.
What that reflects is the FY21 and 22 are actual expenditures, and we use some of our surplus money to do capital items, like I said, like the turf field replacement, the track replacements. So those are rolled into the actual expenditures for capital planning for those years when that fund balance is used for those projects, and that's what those expenditures reflect. We're not expecting any of those projects to be funded this year because of the county not approving any of our surplus to be used for projects.
Vince, you're going to be finalizing some of these numbers and putting them into categories, and you said what was the date you'd have those back to us?
Well, we'll have another budget work session tomorrow if needed, and then we have one in February. We're now negotiating with the teachers and with support staff. We're meeting and confirming bus contractors. So once we have those numbers finalized, I'll be able to put those into the proposed budget. I don't know when those negotiations are going to finish. Also for health insurance, we're hoping to have those numbers before the board adopts their budget in February. But as soon as I have those numbers, I'll update them and put them into the proposed budget for FY25.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you also have some state numbers coming?
Yes, the state aid, the governor releases his budget on January 17th. So once he releases his budget, MSD will release our state aid estimates for next year. And once I get state aid, I'll share that with the board, what the increase is going to be in state aid. I'm thinking probably a couple days after his budget is released, MSD will release their numbers.
I appreciate the draft that was given to us. Is there any way that we would be able to receive, I know that we have the approved fiscal year budget that was approved, but is there any way that we can have numbers of what has actually been spent to date with comparing what those numbers have been approved of as well as the previous year's expenditures to date is like a trend?
Yeah, I can work on getting that to you. It's not a problem.
I think that would be helpful just to see how we are in comparison with the approved numbers versus what we have actually spent to date.
Sure. And we watch those every month in my department. We do watch those numbers and those trends. So we do every month do a closeout, run reports, and track expenditures to budget. So we do that, but I can certainly share that with the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is this all going to be available to the public now that we've had open session, or how does that work?
All this will be part of our exhibit. It'll be
Okay.
posted online for anybody.
Go to board docs?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Tolbert?
Where is the early retirement incentive put into this? I didn't see a
It
line
falls
item for
under
that.
instructional salaries. is where it-
Instructional salaries?
Yeah.
Is there any way that we would be able to make a line item for that pulls it out specifically to be able to see what that number is every year?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. Yep.
Any other questions?
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Tolbert, thank you for that presentation.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Also, thank you too, Mr. Tolbert. Thank you too, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Smack. Thank you, Mr. Fonte. You want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to turn it off.
Turn that one off, Terry. Push it down.
Okay, board members, do I have any other comments? Any other comments before we?
I'd like to say something,
Yes,
Mr.
Mr. Smack.
President. I know we're here for a budget, but we gotta have some little humor, little laughter. You know what I mean? I mean, laughter is good for us. You know, we can't be all tensed up all the time. Have a little laugh every once in a while, make a joke a day, or meetings, okay?
Totally agree with you. Thank you for saying that. Dr. Andes?
As Mr. Tolbert pointed out, the Maryland General Assembly goes back into session on Wednesday for their 90-day session. And I'm hoping that they will make some modifications to the blueprint because, as Mr. Tolbert and others have pointed out, the blueprint is going to present some significant challenges for our school system, especially because a significant majority of the money for the blueprint, unfortunately for us, is using the wealth-based formula. So as Mr. Tolbert has pointed out, there's some additional costs there. As an example, the National Board Certified Teachers at $10,000, and then if they're teaching at a high poverty, it's an additional $7,000, so that's $17,000 that has to come from us. And there are other examples of the wealth-based formula that's going to create some challenges for us. The other aspect of the blueprint that's going to create challenges is the 75% mandate. And in essence, the blueprint says that the money that certain restricted funds we're going to get from the state, 75% of those dollars have to follow the student. And those dollars are going to go to high poverty schools. So that means that, as an example, Shell's not going to get any of that money. Ocean City Elementary School is not going to get any of that money. So at some point in time, what we will have is that money will be flowing to those high poverty schools, in essence the Pocomoke, Snow Hill, Buckingham Elementary School. At the same time, that money from the state, Mr. Tolbert cannot allocate it to Shell or Ocean City Elementary School in my example. So I'd like Mr. Tolbert, if he could, just to explain two concepts that are required under restricted funds in state, and that's supplanting and that's comparability. And those two aspects are going to impact everything we do in terms of that state money coming. So, Mr. Tolbert, could you please explain the whole concept of supplanting in the area of comparability?
Yes, I will try. Supplanting basically applies to federal grants. And what it says is if you have paid for something out of local, unrestricted state money or local money, you can't move that into a restricted grant. The federal grant can't supplant what you've already been doing from a local perspective. Is that good for supplanting?
It's good for me, yes, I understand.
Okay, I know you understand, Dr. He wrote the book. He understands.
but
Do you guys understand? Ladies understand what
Just-
that
just
means?
to
It means
clar-
like I can't get a grant and say my salary can now be paid for from that grant. We can't relieve the local budget pressure by taking local expenditures, unrestricted expenditures, and moving them now to a restricted grant. That's called supplanting. We can't do that per federal law. It's against the law. We would have a bad audit if we did that.
So my point is what Mr. Tolbert just explained, is when restricted funds come to us, we can't backfill with, we can't take that money and move local funds out and backfill local funds. That's supplanting. So now would you please explain comparability?
Yes. Comparability is basically a federal law that says that we have to provide the non-Title I schools and the Title I schools have to receive the same amount of support from a local perspective. So we can't use Title I dollars to provide things at a Title I school that we're already providing at the non-Title I schools. The Title I money has to be used to enhance and expand programs, not to provide similar programs that we're providing at other schools. So does everybody understand what I'm saying? We can't just use that money however we want to. And Dee is a Title I expert. She has been doing it for years.
Go ahead,
And
Ms.
I would
Shorts.
say, including staff.
Yes, including staff, certainly.
We look at staff every year, so we cannot add staff with Title I to add what staff was locally funded in other schools.
And just as a follow-up, what's the accountability for those two phrases? Who checks to make sure we're doing it right?
We have auditors, of course, that do our federal audit every year. We have Title I auditors and federal auditors from the MSD that come and make sure that we're not doing those things. Yes, so we're audited very heavily, Dr. Andes, on both those accounts.
So just, again, just the blueprint will have significant impact on us. The starting salary, the 50,000 moving to 60,000, but also that 75%. And it's going to be very hard for our community to understand why additional resources are being shifted based on that 75%, as an example, to those high poverty schools away from those non-high poverty schools. And I just want our community to understand in January, we have no control over that unless the Maryland General Assembly changes the law. And we're hoping that through the Maryland Association of Boards of Education and lobbying, we can change the law or tweak the law slightly to make a significant difference in that 75%. So instead of, it's more of an aggregate number. So if you're already spending, my example, that 75% threshold at high poverty schools, then we would be given permission to use additional state funding in other places, like in my example, Shell or Ocean City. If that does not happen, that will have significant implications for any school that is a non-high poverty school.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
Yeah. And one other thing I want to say, and the board all knows this, but I want to say it so everybody hears me. I've shared some slides that shows the different budget scenarios at different percentages and salary increases. I've shown how much of our budget is people, okay? So to get where we need to be requires a 6% COLA for the next 3 years, right? So to get there, it's either going to have to be additional revenue from the state or from the county, or it's going to be reductions in the number of people that are working in Worcester County Public Schools. That's the only way to make that work. It's either additional revenue and resources from county or state, or it's less people working here, or not doing the 6%. Those are the choices that we have. There's not, just make sure everybody understands this where we are at this point in time. that's what we're looking at as we prepare the FY25 budget.
And let me add to that, Vince, that's a great point, because it's what keeps me up at night. Our teachers deserve a raise, and I've heard that across the board. And they have been, in my opinion, my professional opinion, stepped on last year really bad for their work to do. It hurts me as a professional educator what we had to give them last year and make cuts to give them. Because I know what goes on in these schools day in and day out. And other people who make judgments who don't spend time there day in and day out really concerns me. So let's just say, I can't remember all the scenarios Vince said, but I do remember the step in 6%. $10 million. Rule of thumb is for every 10 positions, average from the top position to the bottom position, pay-wise, a rule of thumb is for every 10 positions, it's $1 million. So if we were to settle, I'm just throwing it out there, on a step in 6%, and that is not even on the table at this point. They're negotiating. I don't know if it'll be a step in 60% or a step in 1%. That's negotiations. If we were to settle on a step in 6, as an example, with maintenance of effort, I've got to cut, to get to $10 million, I've got to cut 100 positions out of Worcester County Public Schools. 100. And I will tell you that I will go out as strong as I can, because I know what this school system has meant to this community. I know what it means to the kids who come every day, and I'm here for one reason. I love our teachers. I love our staff. But the ones who hurt in that are kids. And I will tell you that if we make a decision, or that decision is made, that we cannot give one teacher's raises, and I've got to cut up to 100 positions to make it work, as Vince has just told you, 93% is in people, 92%. You will never know, for the last 155 years, you will never know Worcester County Public Schools like it has been. And so I challenge you in your hearts today to remember this is about kids. This isn't about somebody we don't like or somebody shouldn't be in the position we're in. The bottom line is this school system is not about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7 people. It's about 6,700 children. And so I challenge you, and I'm passionate about that. I'm not speaking in a tone of anger. I'm passionate about those young people. And that's why I'm here. I love our adults. They do tremendous work. But those kids are the one who will suffer if we can't get to a comparable, reasonable request. And I also want to challenge you, and I know it's not our money. We've been told that it's not our money. Hope you read the local papers this weekend on the new assessment numbers coming out of Ocean City. And I know it's a 3-year average, or 3-year rolling process. But I don't want to hurt kids, and that's my message as we make decisions about what's good and what's not good. And so I just ask you to search your hearts about that as we make decisions moving forward to do what's right for our young people.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Taylor just talked about staffing, and one of the things that our team has been discussing, and I want to share this with the board as well as the public, because I know we have a lot of folks, probably only a few here, but they're wonderful, the ones that are here, is that when we talk about staffing, the first thing that we're talking about is class sizes. I think we've heard very loud and clear from our community through surveys, through parents coming here, through conversations that I know board members as well as the leadership team and our staff has had with us around small class sizes. When you ask us, when people ask Ms. Schwartz and I, and Mr. Taylor I know gets asked this, and I'm sure Dr. Apt and Mr. Tolbert as well, what's your recipe for success? We say it's our kids and our people. Part of that recipe for success in Worcester County Public Schools is our low class sizes. Another significant part of our success, our district has a lot of variety throughout our district, a lot of different families, a lot of different backgrounds. We really are a melting pot in our district, whether it's socioeconomic status, race. The different parts of our district are very different. But one of the things that this board and this community has been very supportive of is that all three areas of our community, all three area schools, different regions, have the same opportunities. And that not only does impact class size, because that specifically has impacts on class size, because for example, at Pocomoke or Snow Hill, you're probably only going to have one section of drama, and at Decatur, you're going to have 4. So it does impact class size, but it also impacts the quality of instruction our students get. So if we were to say at Pocomoke and Snow Hill, we're no longer going to offer AP Biology every year, that has significant impacts. And if we said, oh, well, you can just zoom into somewhere else, it's not the same experience if, for example, a student at Decatur High School is sitting in the class with the teacher and somebody else gets to zoom in on a computer screen. It's not the same experience. We've been committed to that. Equality of programs across our district. And the third and significantly important piece, I think, since COVID, is our mental health supports that we have for our students. And I know Mrs. Addis, we were talking about somebody talked about student services. And I said, do you know enough of, did you hear enough about that? Because I don't know that that's something, those student service workers, those behavioral health and mental health supports that we have are behind the scenes workers. That's one group of people that we didn't talk really about today, but those people are behind the scenes. That's part of our recipes for success, is making sure that every student has the supports they need, whether it's mental health, whether it's supports for their home life so that when they come to school they can think about school. So those are big pieces. Class size is our recipe for success, equality of programs across our school system, and then our mental and behavioral health supports, as well as our people personnel workers. So I just wanted to give you kind of a broad picture into our community. When we say it's staff, those are the things that it means when we talk about staff.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Dr. App, is there anything you'd like to add regarding personnel?
I'll just reiterate what Mr. Tolbert and Mr. Taylor said in reference to cutting those positions to get to a number that we might have to get to for a raise. And in our current world of education, we have a teacher shortage, we have an employee shortage, and we are up against private businesses that pay more than we do here at the school system. So it's a struggle to get folks with our current staffing. And if we reduce our staffing, again, it will affect us in a lot of ways. We'll have to go into the contract. We'll have to, it'll affect a lot of people. The union will be involved. Mr. Taylor will have to do voluntary and involuntary transfers. The blueprint, the whole point behind the blueprint with NBC is getting NBCs, or getting our best teachers with our neediest kids. So that means our NBC teachers should be going to our neediest schools. That's the whole purpose of the blueprint. Our folks that are getting NBC certifications, some of them may or may not want to go to other schools. It's just a lot that has to be thought through as we go through blueprint and as we go through this budget cycle.
Thank you. Ms. Shorts?
Yes, I would just like to concur with what Mr. Taylor said about our teachers and how and bus contractors and support staff, how they do deserve a raise, and how we all felt that last year that that did not happen, that we did have ESSER funds and things to add to their package, but it surely does not add to longevity and to their retirement package. And I know we heard a little bit, and Mrs. Addis brought that up about parents who are concerned about after school and summer school that have been cut. I am sure that if we cut even a tenth of what Mr. Taylor brought up with having to, if we get a maintenance of effort budget and we cut a tenth of what Mr. Taylor alluded to, I am quite sure that we'll be hearing from a number of parents around class sizes increasing, as Dr. Wallace mentioned, programs being lost due to that, and again, the fact that it will be a very different Worcester County, and that would just be 1 year of another maintenance of effort budget. So as Mr. Taylor started this out, you know, we know that all of you have a very tough job ahead of you, and we're all here to provide any additional information that you may need around, whether it be summer school, after school, any additional information around these programs. But it is very important that we look at what we've built here in Worcester County and try to keep the integrity of our school system. And I know that some people have downplayed the success of our school system and that it doesn't mean much to be first in the state, the number of years that we have been able to maintain our status, but we are very proud of where we have landed, and we continue to work very hard to maintain that status, and we're very proud of our students and our staff and our parents for working as hard as they do to maintain that status. So thank you for the work that you're going to have to do. And again, we're here to continue to give you that information to help you make those decisions.
Great. Anyone else? Any other board members? Before I call for an adjournment, I do want to ask our board members, we had allocated 2 days for this work session, basically, and I think all of us need to go through and digest these numbers and look at everything. So I'm not sure that tomorrow is a requirement in order for us to do that. So asking our board members, I think we can forego tomorrow's meeting until Mr. Tolbert comes back to us with some more solidified numbers, if everyone is okay with that.
Mr. Franti, I did want to add that we had the February 6th budget work sessions
Yes.
on the books.
Yes, I know
and I'll
we
have
do,
those
yeah.
numbers. So.
Yeah, that's fine, and I appreciate you adding that, Vince. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, so there
Could
will...
we get the numbers that I also asked for that February 6th meeting, the breakdown year to year, as well as where we are year to date up until
with
this
the
point?
trend numbers?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
year to year, refresh my memory with the year to year. Terry was taking
Just
notes.
year to date.
Year to date with the
year to
trend,
date,
budget
yes.
actual. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
Budget
budget
actuals,
actual
yep.
this year.
Yep.
That's what you
Yes.
want. Yep.
That'd be great.
Understanding that all bills don't come in at the same
Correct.
time.
Yep.
I think that needs to be very.
Yeah, I get
That's a
that,
good
but
point,
I
Dr.
think it would just be nice to see year to date because typically the bills are coming in at the same time yearly.
It just depends on, like, we have big instructional contracts that don't always come in. At
Okay.
the same time.
But then
Just
if,
ask questions.
right, if that could be then made known so that we take that into consideration,
Sure,
that would just
yep.
be helpful to
I'll
see.
get that to you. Katie.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Mr. Tolbert, you have February the 20th. Now you're saying February the 16th?
Well, February 6th was a scheduled budget work session, and February 20th is actually the board meeting where you adopt the proposed budget. Yeah.
Okay, Vince, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Presentation, we appreciate it. So tomorrow we will not be having another meeting. Our next meeting will be our regular scheduled meeting, and I believe that is on the 21st, and that'll be in this board room. We'll be going, it's on the 23rd, and we'll be going into closed session at 10 o'clock or 10:30, and then we'll we'll resume in open session at 12:30. And that will be held at this central office at 6270 at Worcester Highway, Newark, Maryland. And Mr. Taylor has something. Yes.
Right, no,
For
no,
this month.
January.
16.
January 16th. You said January 16th? No, it's February 16th.
No, we have a January board meeting. On the
I
16th.
thought you said the budget hearing.
No, January 16th is our next board.
That's correct.
Full board meeting, and I'm going to tell you something else about that in just a minute. Then February the 6th will be a budget work session.
Okay.
And then February the 20th will be the February board meeting.
Okay.
Everybody, are we all clear?
Yep. So we have January 16th is our next board meeting here at the central office. Okay. February 6th will be the budget hearing meeting, and then February 20th will be our regular board scheduled meeting
Also,
here at the office.
I want to remind you that at the January board meeting, hopefully we won't be as long as our last, but if we are, we will have to recess at 4 o'clock because we will be doing a tenure reception over next door, and I will have tenured teachers coming from all 14 schools to be recognized that day. So hopefully we'll be done by 4, but if we're not, we will have to recess, go over, and then come back and finish the board meeting.
That's fine.
So 4 o'clock, tenure reception, and I'd like for, if you can stay, if we're over, if you can stay, I'd at least like to have some of you stay for that reception to recognize our tenured teachers.
Thank you for those announcements, Mr. Taylor. And today I would call for a motion to adjourn today's open session meeting.
Motion.
A second. Motion by Mr. Smack.
Second.
A second by Mr. Gordy. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.